I never thought my own son could treat me like a stranger in my own house. The words cut through me like a blade. Give my wife your room, or get out right now. I froze, my own blood, my own child, demanding I surrender my space, my home, my dignity. For a moment, I wondered if I should walk away, if it was time to leave, but something inside me snapped. This was not just about a room. It was about respect, about pride, about justice. And what I did next would leave him speechless. I am Robert, 62 years old. I have spent my entire life working, sacrificing, and building a home where my family could feel safe and loved. Every corner of this house holds a memory, from the laughter of my late wife to the small arguments that shaped our marriage. My son, Daniel, is 34, tall, confident, and always certain that his way is the only way. He is married to Melissa, a woman I welcomed into our lives with open arms. On the surface, she is polite, charming, and considerate. But I could not ignore the subtle ways she and Daniel began to shift the balance of power in my own home. I had never felt displaced before. I have lived in this house for decades. I have walked these halls since Daniel was a boy, watched him grow from a mischievous child into a man I am proud of in many ways. Yet that pride does not blind me to reality. He has begun to act as if my years, my sacrifices, and even my presence do not matter. It started slowly, a comment here, a suggestion there. Then came the demands disguised as requests, and finally, the day when he crossed a line I never thought he would. It was a Tuesday evening. The rain fell heavily, drumming against the roof with a relentless rhythm, as if nature itself sensed the storm inside these walls. I was sitting in my study, a warm cup of coffee in my hand, surrounded by shelves lined with books and mementos from a lifetime of hard work. The air smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood. I heard the front door slam, echoing through the house like a warning. Moments later, Daniel entered, his face red and tense, his voice sharp and unyielding. "Give my wife your room, or get out of here right now," he shouted. I froze. For a moment, I could not believe my ears. My son, the boy I held in my arms and nurtured for decades, was standing above me, demanding that I surrender the room I had lived in for more than 30 years. The room where memories of my late wife lingered, where every item told a story, was suddenly being claimed by someone else as if it belonged to them. I felt the first surge of anger, hot and bitter, crawling through my chest. My heart pounded against my ribcage. My hands gripped the edge of the desk as if I could anchor myself to reality. I wanted to respond immediately, to assert my rights, but shock froze me. How had it come to this? How could my son speak to me with such entitlement, such disregard for everything I had done for him? The injustice of it all weighed heavily. This was not merely about a room. It was about respect, about acknowledgement, about being seen as more than an obstacle in someone else's comfort. I realized in that moment that I had a choice. I could walk away, leave the room, retreat into silence. I could let Daniel and Melissa reshape my home without opposition. Or I could stand my ground and fight back, not with anger alone, but with careful planning, with strategy, with the kind of patience that comes from decades of experience. As the rain continued to fall outside, I sat in silence, listening to the echo of Daniel's words over and over. I felt a strange calm beginning to form beneath the shock, a resolve that something had to change. If I walked away now, I would lose more than a room. I would lose a piece of myself, and I could not allow that. Not now. Not ever. I knew this would not be easy. Daniel is clever, persistent, and completely convinced that he is in the right. But I have something he cannot take. The knowledge of this house, the patience to wait, and the will to reclaim what is mine. And deep inside, I felt a flicker of something dangerous, something that would soon grow into a plan that neither Daniel nor Melissa would see coming. This was the beginning of a long night, a long journey, and a story that would leave all of us changed forever. If you have ever been disrespected by someone you love, hit that like button and subscribe. This story is about standing your ground, taking back what is yours, and showing the people who underestimate you that you are not to be crossed. The next morning, the house felt different. I could sense it the moment I awoke. It was quieter, colder, and somehow smaller. Daniel moved through the rooms with a confidence that felt like an invasion. Melissa followed behind him, smiling politely, but there was a glint in her eyes that made my skin crawl. They acted as if they owned everything, as if my presence was merely tolerated. Every step they took, every laugh they shared, reminded me that the balance of power had shifted. I tried to ignore it at first. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat in the living room, pretending to read the morning paper. But Daniel's movements were impossible to ignore. He rearranged the furniture in the room I once called mine, shifting my books, my photographs, my personal belongings, without so much as a word. Each motion was deliberate, calculated. He wanted me to feel small. He wanted me to retreat. I watched him over the rim of my mug, my hands trembling slightly as anger and disbelief collided inside me. How had he become so bold, so dismissive, so willing to erase the life I had built? He smiled at Melissa, showing her a chair that once belonged to me, and gestured as if I were invisible. The audacity made my blood boil, yet I forced myself to remain calm. I could not allow anger to guide me. Not yet. I tried to speak, to appeal to reason, to memory, to decency. "Daniel," I said carefully, my voice steady despite the storm inside, "this is my home. I built this house with my own hands, and I raised you here. I think I deserve some say in what happens." He laughed. Not a gentle laugh, not a joking one, but sharp, dismissive, cruel. "Times change, Dad," he said, his eyes cold. "Your room is small. Melissa deserves comfort. That is just how it is now." The words hit me like a fist. I felt my chest tighten, my vision narrow, my stomach churn. This was not just disrespect. This was an attempt to erase me, to rewrite history in a way that left me powerless. I wanted to shout, to demand respect, to remind him of the years, the sacrifices, the nights I stayed awake to provide for him. But I held back. I knew that any outburst now would play into their hands. They wanted a reaction, and I refused to give it. But the tension did not fade. Each day brought new slights, cups of coffee disappeared. Books were misplaced or discarded. Doors were locked without explanation. Small, calculated annoyances designed to wear me down, to make me doubt myself. I felt like a ghost in my own home, my own memories being overwritten by entitlement and arrogance. And yet, beneath the frustration, a seed of determination began to grow. I began to observe them carefully, noting habits, weaknesses, moments when they let their guard down. Every gesture, every expression, every careless word became a piece of a puzzle I was assembling. I would not fight blindly. I would not act rashly. I would wait, and I would strike when the time was right. Some nights, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rain patter against the roof. I imagined what it would feel like to reclaim my home, to restore balance, to show Daniel and Melissa that disrespect has consequences. The thought brought a thrill, a surge of energy, a clarity that had eluded me in the heat of anger. I realized something vital in those quiet hours. This was no longer about a room. It was about respect. It was about boundaries. It was about justice. And I swore to myself silently that I would not be dismissed, not by my son, not by anyone. The tension inside me built with every passing day. I could feel it coiling tighter and tighter, a spring ready to release. And I knew, deep down, that the moment to act would come sooner than they expected. They had pushed me too far. They had underestimated me completely, and I would make them pay in a way they would never forget. The breaking point came on a Thursday afternoon, quiet and unassuming, the kind of moment that changes everything without warning. I was in the kitchen washing a plate when I noticed my old family photo album sitting on the counter. It had always been kept in my study, carefully stored, untouched by anyone but me. My hands froze in the soapy water. A slow, cold realization spread through my chest. They had gone into my private space without permission. They had touched the one thing that held my entire life inside it. I opened the album with shaking fingers. Several photographs were missing, not misplaced, not shuffled. Missing my wedding picture. A photo of Daniel as a child sitting on my shoulders. A picture of my late wife smiling in the garden. My vision blurred, not from tears, but from rage that felt sharp and focused. This was not carelessness. This was control. This was a message. I walked into the living room and saw Melissa scrolling through her phone, smiling to herself. Daniel sat beside her, relaxed, confident, as if the world belonged to him. I asked calmly, "Did either of you take pictures from my album?" Melissa looked up slowly, her smile fading just enough to reveal irritation. "Yes," she said. "I needed some decoration for our room. They were old anyway." Old. That word echoed in my mind like an insult carved into stone. My memories, my life, reduced to decoration. Something inside me shifted. The anger I had been suppressing no longer felt wild or chaotic. It became controlled, focused, sharp as a blade. I nodded once, said nothing, and returned to my room. They assumed silence meant defeat. They were wrong. I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the walls that had once felt like sanctuary. Every detail of that space mattered to me. The crack in the paint from when Daniel threw a ball as a boy. The corner where my wife used to place fresh flowers. They wanted this room. They wanted my identity. They wanted to erase me gently, quietly, without resistance. That was when clarity came. I realized something powerful in that moment. They believed I was weak because I was calm. They believed I was old because I was quiet. They believed I was finished because I did not argue. But patience is not weakness. Silence is not surrender. Experience is a weapon, and I had decades of it. I began thinking, not emotionally, but strategically. Daniel and Melissa were careless in their confidence. They moved without caution. They assumed ownership without understanding. And that arrogance was their greatest weakness. I knew the house better than anyone. I knew every document, every account, every bill, every legal detail. The deed, the utilities, the insurance, the structure of ownership. They lived here because I allowed it. And that meant I controlled more than they realized. The plan did not arrive all at once. It built slowly, piece by piece, like a storm forming on the horizon. I would not explode. I would not argue. I would not beg. I would reposition the board and let them walk into their own consequences. That night, I retrieved my old financial folder from the safe beneath the floorboard, the one Daniel had never known about. Inside were copies of everything that mattered: property ownership, banking authority, legal responsibility. It was all there. I had kept it organized for emergencies. This had become one. I sat at the small desk and began writing. Not angrily, calmly calculating, I made notes of what needed to be changed, what needed to be removed, and what needed to be protected. I would make sure that every decision was legally solid and morally justified. No shouting, no drama, only consequences. As I wrote, I felt something powerful rising in me. Not revenge alone. I was not reacting anymore. I was leading. They thought they had taken my room. What they had actually done was awaken a part of me that had been dormant for years. A man who no longer sought approval. A man who no longer needed validation. A man who knew exactly when to strike. I closed the folder and placed it back in its hiding place. My hands were steady. My breathing was calm. My mind was clear. This was no longer a fight about space. This was a lesson about respect. And lessons, when taught properly, are never forgotten. They believed the story was already written. They were about to learn that I was still the author. I moved slowly, carefully, every step measured, every breath controlled. The house was quiet that morning, the kind of quiet that makes your ears ring. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the distant traffic outside, the faint ticking of the clock in the hallway. It felt like the world was holding its breath with me. First, I went to my study and locked the door. That sound gave me a strange sense of power. It was small, but it was real. I pulled out the folder and laid everything across the desk: papers, deeds, bank statements, utility accounts, insurance documents, everything that proved one simple truth. This house was mine, and their comfort existed because I allowed it. I started with the essentials. I called the bank. My voice was calm, polite, precise. I need to remove secondary access from my account. The clerk confirmed my identity. The keyboard clicked. It is done, sir. A quiet hook of satisfaction twisted in my chest. One door closed. They did not even know it yet. Next, I contacted the utility companies. Electricity, water, internet. Every service was in my name. I did not cancel them. I transferred billing and authority to myself alone. No shared access, no permissions, no loopholes. Control did not need to be loud. Control only needed to be absolute. I paused, listening to footsteps upstairs. Daniel and Melissa were awake. They were laughing, comfortable, unaware. That sound fueled me more than anger ever could. They were standing on a floor that was about to collapse beneath their confidence. I walked into the hallway as Daniel came down the stairs. "Morning, Dad," he said casually. "Morning," I replied. My heart was steady. My voice was calm. My hands did not shake. He could not sense what was coming. That was the best part. I spent the afternoon preparing my room. Not packing, reclaiming. I gathered my belongings and placed them into secure storage in the garage. Boxers labeled, items wrapped carefully, photographs placed in a metal case. Every movement felt ceremonial, like preparing for a war that would be won without a single shout. Then I made the call that would shift everything. My lawyer, can I legally issue a notice of residence termination to adult occupants? Yes, if the property is in your name alone. How long do they have? 30 days, if you choose to be generous. Generous, that word made me smile. By evening, the documents were printed and sealed in an envelope. Heavy, thick, final. The house smelled like dinner when I walked into the kitchen. Melissa was stirring a pot. Daniel leaned against the counter. "Smells good," I said. They looked surprised by my calm. That pleased me. "Sit down," I continued. "I need to speak with both of you." Daniel rolled his eyes, but sat. Melissa followed. The chair scraped against the floor, loud in the silence. My pulse remained steady. This was no confrontation. This was an announcement. I placed the envelope on the table. "What is this?" Daniel asked. "Read it." He opened it slowly. His eyebrows tightened as he scanned the page. His confidence shifted just slightly. Melissa leaned closer, her smile fading. "You are asking us to leave," she said sharply. "No," I replied. "I am informing you that you no longer have permission to stay." Daniel looked up. "You are serious." I have never been more serious in my life. The air thickened. I could feel it pressing against my skin. The ticking clock grew louder. "You cannot do this," he said. "I already did." Melissa crossed her arms. Over a room, I leaned forward, resting my palms on the table. "This is not about a room. This is about respect, and you both decided I did not deserve any." Daniel stood abruptly. "You are being dramatic." I met his eyes. "You confused my silence with weakness. That was your mistake." The words landed harder than shouting ever could. They tried to argue. They tried to intimidate. I did not move. I did not raise my voice. Every sentence I spoke was short, controlled, final. "This house is mine. My name is on every document. You are guests. Guests do not make demands." The color drained from Daniel's face. Melissa looked around the room as if she was seeing it for the first time. Not as a prize, but as something slipping away. I stood and walked back to my study. Click, the lock closed behind me. And for the first time in weeks, I felt taller. The 30 days passed slower for them than they did for me. Every morning I awoke with a strange calm, like the quiet before a storm that had already decided its outcome. The house felt different, not tense, not hostile, controlled. They walked softer, spoke less. Their confidence had evaporated, replaced by nervous glances and forced politeness. Power had shifted, and they knew it. The final day arrived with cold sunlight pouring through the windows, sharp and unforgiving. I sat in the living room, waiting. The clock ticked loudly, each second landing like a judge's gavel. My hands rested calmly on my knees. My breathing was steady. There was no anger left in me, only certainty. Daniel came down the stairs first, dragging a suitcase. Melissa followed, her face tight, eyes swollen from nights of restless sleep. The once proud posture she carried had collapsed inward. They looked smaller now, not physically, emotionally. Daniel stopped in front of me. "So this is really happening," he said. I nodded. It already happened. Silence filled the room, heavy, thick. "Final, you are choosing a house over your own son," he said. I looked at him carefully, not as a father protecting a child, but as a man facing another adult who had crossed a line. "No," I replied. "I am choosing dignity over disrespect." Melissa scoffed weakly. "You could have talked to us." "I tried," I said. "You laughed." That memory flickered in his eyes. The mocking tone he once used. The arrogance, the entitlement. It all returned to him in that moment. I watched realization settle like dust after an explosion. "You made your choice when you told me to get out of my own home," I continued. "Today is simply the consequence." Daniel clenched his jaw. "You raised me, and now you throw me away." I stood slowly. My joints protested, but my spine straightened with purpose. "I raised you to respect people," I said. "You chose power instead." That was when his composure cracked. His shoulders slumped, his voice softened. That waned. I raised my hand gently. Not in anger, in finality. "This conversation is over." The room was silent, except for the low hum of the refrigerator. Melissa shifted uncomfortably. Daniel looked around, as if expecting something to save him. Nothing did. They walked toward the door. Each step echoed, each breath felt heavier. When Daniel placed his hand on the handle, he hesitated, just long enough for the weight of it all to hit him. He turned back once more. "I never thought you would do this," he said quietly. I met his eyes. "Neither did I, but you never thought I would stand up for myself." The door opened. Cold air rushed inside, carrying the scent of winter and endings. They stepped outside, dragging their bags across the porch. The sound scraped against the wood like punctuation to a sentence that had been building for weeks. I watched from the doorway as they reached their car. No shouting, no dramatic exit, just silence, heavy, inevitable. Daniel opened the trunk. Melissa placed her bag inside. Their movements were mechanical, empty of defiance. When Daniel closed the trunk, he rested his forehead against the metal for a moment. Defeated, that was the moment justice settled into my bones. Not joy, not cruelty, relief. A slow, powerful release that traveled from my chest to my fingertips. My shoulders dropped. My breathing deepened. I felt taller, grounded, whole. They entered the car. The engine started. The tires rolled forward. And then they were gone. I stood there longer than necessary, listening to the silence they left behind. No laughter, no entitlement, no invasion, only peace. I closed the door. The click echoed like a crown being placed on my head. I walked through the house, touching the walls, the furniture, the memories. Everything was where it belonged. Again, the air felt lighter. The space felt mine, not just legally, emotionally. They had come into my life believing strength was dominance. They left understanding strength is self-respect, and I had never felt more validated in my entire life. Standing alone in the living room after they left, I felt a silence that was both heavy and liberating. The storm had passed, and the house finally felt like mine again. I walked slowly from room to room, touching the walls, the furniture, the objects that had once been overlooked, dismissed, and disrespected. Each piece reminded me of who I was, who I had always been, and the life I had built. I realized then that justice is not always about punishment. Sometimes it is about reclaiming what was stolen: your dignity, your space, your voice. For years, I had allowed small injustices to slide. I told myself it was easier to keep peace, to avoid conflict. But peace without respect is nothing more than silence in the shadow of oppression. Daniel and Melissa believed they could erase my history, take what I had earned, and diminish my presence. They were wrong. Not because I confronted them with anger, but because I waited, observed, and acted with precision. Karma, I realized, does not always require violence or vengeance in its traditional form. Karma is a reflection. It is the moment a person sees the consequences of their choices unfold in a way they cannot control. I learned something essential about human nature in those weeks. Entitlement is dangerous. Arrogance blinds people. People who think the world owes them respect often forget that respect is earned, maintained, and protected. Daniel and Melissa had assumed their comfort was automatic. They had assumed silence meant consent. They had assumed I would not fight back. Those assumptions became their undoing. I did not need to shout, to threaten, or to humiliate beyond the truth. The truth alone, wielded calmly, had been enough. I also discovered something about myself. Age does not diminish strength. Experience is a weapon that cannot be taken away. Patience is a form of power. And dignity, once threatened, can be reclaimed in ways that leave a lasting impression. I felt lighter, stronger, almost reborn. The weight of their disrespect no longer sat on my chest. It had been lifted by action, not anger. I had not only protected my home, but also reaffirmed my identity, my authority, and my life. As I stood in the quiet, I realized life gives you opportunities to test your boundaries. Some people will push until they break you, or until they meet a force they cannot predict. I had met that force within myself. No apology was necessary. No forgiveness was required. The lesson was not for me to forgive, but for them to understand that actions have consequences. That respect is not optional. You cannot trample someone and expect the earth to remain level beneath your feet. Now, the house feels alive again. Each sound, each smell, each corner tells a story of resilience, of patience, of strategy. I can finally breathe in my own home without tension, without intrusion, without fear that my life will be rewritten by someone else's entitlement. I feel vindicated, not in a cruel way, but in the quiet satisfaction of knowing I stood my ground. Justice does not always arrive as punishment. Sometimes it arrives as clarity, as control, as restoration. And sometimes it arrives in the subtle but undeniable lesson that life has a way of balancing itself even when people believe they are untouchable. I am older now, wiser, and infinitely more certain of my worth. And I know this. No one, not even family, can erase you if you refuse to be erased. That truth is more satisfying than any moment of revenge. It lingers, it empowers, and it ensures you are never forgotten. If this story gave you chills, hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and tell us about the time you stood up for yourself. Subscribe for more gripping tales of justice, strategy, and standing your ground. And see how ordinary people turn their most difficult moments into unforgettable victories.